Somewhere in Oklahoma City, under bright arena lights, a 7'4" alien from France just dropped 41 points, grabbed 24 rebounds, and blocked 3 shots, in a game his team was never supposed to win. And 3,000 kilometers away, in a glass office in downtown Los Angeles, a general manager sat in silence, staring at a screen, watching his championship dream get dismantled in real time by a 22-year-old who looked like he belonged on another planet. That night didn't just end a basketball game. It quietly started a chain reaction that would shake the entire Los Angeles Lakers franchise to its core, force them to break open their vault, give away future draft picks like candy, and completely change the direction of their team. This is the real story of how one man's terrifying rise pushed the Lakers to abandon patience, panic in the trade market, and scramble for size before it was too late. Let's rewind to where it all really began. It was the Western Conference Finals. The Oklahoma City Thunder were the defending champions. They had home court. They had the reigning MVP, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, standing on that court, trophy in hand, before Game 1 even tipped off. Everything about that night was set up to be a celebration for Oklahoma City. A coronation. A victory lap before the real fight even started. Nobody told Victor Wembanyama that. While Shai was still holding his trophy under the lights, Wembanyama walked past him with a look that said he didn't care about anybody's resume. He cared about one thing: winning. And for the next 2 hours, he made that clear to everyone watching. 41 points. 24 rebounds. 3 blocks. In double overtime. On the road. Against the defending champs. It wasn't just a good game. It was one of those performances that make broadcasters stop mid-sentence, that make opposing coaches shake their heads on the sideline, that make basketball fans everywhere reach for their phones to make sure what they just saw was real. By the time the final buzzer sounded, something had shifted in the basketball world. People weren't just talking about a hot streak anymore. They were talking about a changing of the guard. Some of the biggest voices in basketball media came right out and said it. This wasn't just a great player having a great night. This was, quite possibly, the best player in the world, right now, in this moment, on this stage. Think about how heavy that statement is. Not the best young player. Not the most promising talent. The best player. Full stop. Against the best team. In the biggest games. At 22 years old, in just his 3rd professional season. For most teams around the league, that kind of performance is simply something to admire from a distance. A reminder of how special the sport can be. But if you were sitting inside the Lakers front office that spring, admiration was the last thing on your mind. Because the Lakers weren't just a team watching from the outside. They were staring down a brutal reality. If they wanted to win a championship at some point, they were going to have to walk directly into the path of this basketball alien and somehow survive. And right now, they had absolutely nothing that could stop him. To understand how urgent this problem had become, you have to understand where the Lakers stood at that exact moment. They had already made one of the most dramatic trades in franchise history not long before, bringing in a generational superstar to build around. It had shocked the entire league when it happened. Nobody expected a franchise cornerstone to be moved in the middle of a season, let alone one as young and as talented as the guard the Lakers landed. Overnight, the identity of the team changed. The offense became faster, sharper, more dangerous. Fans who had spent years watching the franchise search for its next great era suddenly had a reason to believe again. Highlight reels were flooding social media. Ticket sales were climbing. The buzz around the team felt like it hadn't felt in years. But greatness on one end of the floor doesn't mean much if you can't survive the other end. Basketball has always been a game of matchups, of counters, of finding the one thing the other team cannot answer. And for all the excitement surrounding their new backcourt star, the Lakers had a problem that dazzling offense alone could never fix. When it came to protecting the paint, controlling the boards, and standing chest to chest with a 7'4" force of nature, the Lakers had a gaping hole in the middle of their roster. It was the one flaw that threatened to undo everything else they were building. Their starting center that season had been a disappointment. Not because he didn't try. Not because he lacked talent. But because the modern NBA had changed, and centers who couldn't stretch the floor, couldn't protect the rim at an elite level, and couldn't match up physically with the new breed of giants were quickly becoming liabilities instead of assets. And now, with Wembanyama looming over the entire Western Conference like a storm cloud that refused to move, that weakness wasn't just a concern anymore. It was an emergency. Here's the thing that made this moment so uniquely terrifying for Lakers fans and executives alike. This wasn't a problem they could simply out-talent their way through. You could have the best perimeter scorer in the world. You could have shooters lined up across the arc. None of it matters if the other team has a 7'4" athlete who can block your shot from behind after you thought you were already past him, who can grab every rebound you miss, and who can also step out and knock down threes on the other end like a guard. Wembanyama wasn't just a good player. He was a problem that broke the usual rules of team building. And it wasn't only his size that made him so dangerous. Plenty of tall players have walked through the league without ever becoming a real problem for opposing front offices. What made Wembanyama different was the combination. The way he moved like a guard trapped in a giant's body. The way he could switch onto a point guard on one possession and swat away a dunk attempt from a power forward on the next. The way he stepped beyond the three-point line without hesitation, without a hint of awkwardness, and calmly buried shots that most 7-footers wouldn't even attempt in a shoot-around. Coaches around the league had started calling him a cheat code, only half joking. Because traditional basketball logic says you cannot have it all. You cannot be the tallest player on the floor and also the most mobile. You cannot protect the rim like a wall and also space the floor like a sharpshooter. You cannot dominate as a rookie sensation and then somehow get even better, even scarier, every single year that follows. Wembanyama seemed determined to break every one of those rules, one game at a time. So the front office did what front offices do when panic starts creeping in. They started making calls. They started scanning the trade market. They needed a center, and they needed one fast, because if they waited even one more season, the gap between their roster and true championship contention might become impossible to close. The first names that came up were the obvious ones. There was a dominant defensive anchor over in Oklahoma City himself, a player many considered the best available option at the position, but everyone around the league knew he wasn't walking out that door. The team that had just been humbled by Wembanyama in the Western Conference Finals wasn't about to let one of the very pieces that helped them compete simply walk into free agency. Then there was another name, a former star known for his shot blocking and rim running ability, but his recent injury history cast a long shadow over any serious pursuit. Teams love upside, but they hate uncertainty, and this particular big man carried plenty of both. A third option floated around as well, a rangy defensive presence with real starting caliber talent, but questions about his athleticism heading into his 30s made executives hesitate. Nobody wanted to trade away future assets for a player who might not be able to keep pace with the very problem he was being brought in to solve. Every path seemed to lead to a dead end. Every available option came with a catch. And all the while, the clock kept ticking. Free agency was approaching. The trade deadline conversations were heating up behind the scenes. And Wembanyama kept getting better, kept getting stronger, kept getting more terrifying with every single game he played. Then, almost as if fate wanted to twist the knife a little deeper, a moment happened that sent the entire internet into a frenzy. After a tough loss to Oklahoma City in Game 3 of that same Western Conference Finals series, cameras caught Wembanyama in a post-game moment that instantly went viral. Whether it was said in complete seriousness, in frustration, or with a hint of playful exaggeration, the words that came out of his mouth spread across social media like wildfire. He expressed a desire, real or joking, to be traded to the Lakers. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Sports pages, fan forums, group chats, highlight compilation channels. The idea of Victor Wembanyama in a Lakers jersey standing next to their new superstar point guard was simply too delicious for the internet to ignore, even if nobody could say with certainty how serious he actually was. Now, to be very clear, this was not an official trade request. This was not the Spurs putting their franchise cornerstone on the market. San Antonio had zero intention of moving on from the player they had built their entire future around. But the moment revealed something important. It revealed just how much gravity Wembanyama had already accumulated in the basketball universe. Even a passing comment from him, whether serious or not, was enough to make an entire fan base collectively hold its breath and dream about impossible scenarios. For a few wild days, Lakers fans allowed themselves to imagine it. What would it actually look like? Their electric young superstar running the offense, weaving through defenders, finding the open man. And trailing behind him, a 7'4" shot blocking, three-point shooting unicorn cleaning up every mistake, protecting every mismatch, anchoring both ends of the floor. It was the kind of fantasy that keeps basketball fans up at night, scrolling through fan-made trade graphics that would never actually happen. But fantasies, no matter how fun, eventually meet reality. And reality, in this case, was blunt and unforgiving. San Antonio was never trading Victor Wembanyama. Not for draft picks. Not for expiring contracts. Not for anything the Lakers could realistically offer. He was their franchise. Their identity. Their future. You do not trade away a player who might be the best in the world at 22 years old, no matter how tempting the return package might look on paper. So the Lakers front office, as much as the internet wanted to believe otherwise, was never actually building toward some fantasy blockbuster for Wembanyama himself. What they were building toward was something more grounded, more achievable, and honestly, more urgent. They needed their own version of an answer. Not Wembanyama himself, but someone who could at least stand in the same building as him without getting bulldozed. And that search led them somewhere nobody quite expected. While all the noise, all the speculation, all the viral clips were swirling around the basketball world, the Lakers front office was quietly working the phones with a very different franchise. The Utah Jazz. Tucked away in a rebuilding situation of their own, the Jazz had a 24-year-old big man who had quietly developed into one of the most promising young defensive anchors in the league. He wasn't a household name the way Wembanyama was. He didn't have the viral highlight reels or the global buzz. But scouts around the league knew exactly what he brought to the table. Elite rim protection. Real mobility for his size. The kind of modern big man skill set that could survive, and even thrive, in a league that was rapidly being reshaped by the very problem the Lakers were trying to solve. His name was Walker Kessler. Kessler wasn't a name that showed up in highlight reels shared across every corner of the internet. He wasn't chased by camera crews the way Wembanyama was. He had spent his young career quietly working in Utah, a franchise that, in recent years, had been more focused on gathering future assets and developing young talent than chasing wins right away. But inside league circles, among coaches, scouts, and executives who study film for a living, Kessler's name kept coming up again and again. He blocked shots at an elite rate. He moved his feet well enough to survive on the perimeter, a rare trait for a player his size. And perhaps most importantly, he was still only 24 years old, meaning whichever team eventually built around him would likely be getting him in the middle of his physical prime for years to come. For weeks, rumors simmered quietly in the background. Insiders hinted that talks between the two franchises were heating up. Front office reporters started dropping cryptic messages about significant draft compensation being discussed. And then, finally, it happened. The trade came together, and when the details became public, it sent a shockwave through the league that rivaled the emotional whiplash of the Wembanyama viral moment weeks earlier. The Los Angeles Lakers had agreed to send not one, not two, but two unprotected future first-round draft picks, along with two additional first-round pick swaps, to the Utah Jazz in exchange for Walker Kessler. Let that sink in for a moment. Two unprotected first-round picks. Not protected in the top 10. Not protected in the top 5. Completely unprotected, meaning the Jazz would get those picks no matter how good or bad those future Lakers teams turned out to be. On top of that, two additional swap rights, giving Utah even more long-term flexibility and potential value depending on how both franchises developed over the coming years. This was not a minor transaction. This was a franchise-altering, future-mortgaging, all-in bet on the present. The kind of trade that gets debated on sports talk shows for weeks. The kind of trade that makes even loyal fans pause and ask themselves, was it really worth it? The reaction across the basketball world was immediate and split right down the middle. On one side, you had fans and analysts who understood exactly why the Lakers made this move. They pointed back to that Western Conference Finals performance. They pointed to the terrifying trajectory of Wembanyama's career. They argued that in a league increasingly dominated by size, athleticism, and versatile bigs, having a true defensive anchor next to your generational superstar wasn't a luxury anymore. It was a requirement. If the Lakers wanted any realistic path to a championship in the years ahead, especially with the shadow of Wembanyama hanging over the entire Western Conference, they needed size, and they needed it now, whatever the cost. On the other side, you had skeptics who looked at that price tag and shook their heads. 2 unprotected firsts and 2 swaps for a player who, while promising, had never made an all-star team, had never been the focal point of a winning franchise, and was walking into a completely different level of pressure and spotlight in Los Angeles. Critics pointed out the danger of mortgaging future flexibility in a league where circumstances change fast, where injuries happen, where a promising young player in one system doesn't always translate the same way in another. But underneath all the debate, all the arguments back and forth, there was one thing almost everyone agreed on. The Lakers didn't make this trade in a vacuum. They made it because of him. Because of Wembanyama. Because watching that Western Conference Finals series unfold had convinced an entire front office that patience was no longer an option. It's worth stepping back here and looking at the bigger picture, because the Lakers weren't the only team suddenly panicking about size. Across the league, the ripple effects of Wembanyama's dominance were being felt everywhere. The very team that had just beaten the Spurs in that unforgettable Western Conference Finals series, Oklahoma City, wasn't sitting back either. Even as defending champions, even fresh off eliminating the very player causing all this chaos, they used a lottery pick in that year's draft to bring in another young big man, stacking size upon size, as if bracing for future battles against Wembanyama that everyone knew were coming. And in a move that felt almost poetic, even San Antonio itself, the team that already had the most terrifying big man on the planet, used multiple draft picks to bring in even more size around him. As if building an entire army around their one true weapon. Centers, for years considered a fading, undervalued position in a league obsessed with small ball and three-point shooting, were suddenly the most contested, most valuable trade chips in basketball. Teams that once ignored the position were now scrambling, bidding, mortgaging futures, all because one player had single-handedly reminded the entire league what a truly dominant big man could do to a championship race. The Lakers, whether by necessity or by fear, had simply been the team willing to move first and move biggest. But acquiring Walker Kessler wasn't the end of the story. It was, in many ways, just the beginning of a much larger shift happening behind the scenes in the Lakers' front office. Because even after adding size at center, whispers continued to swirl about an even bigger swing the Lakers might be considering. For months, rumors had connected the Lakers to one of the most dominant forces in the entire league, a 2-time most valuable player who had been the subject of trade speculation coming out of Milwaukee. The idea was simple, and honestly, kind of terrifying if you were an opposing fan. What if the Lakers didn't stop at adding a solid defensive center? What if they went all in, pursuing a genuine two-way superstar forward, someone who could match physicality with anyone in the league, including Wembanyama himself, and pair him directly next to their electric young point guard? Reports throughout the summer suggested the Lakers had been mentioned, at various points, in conversations surrounding the superstar's future. Some insiders were skeptical the Lakers actually had enough assets left, especially after already surrendering multiple future first-round picks in the Kessler deal, to put together a package substantial enough to pry a top-tier superstar away from a rival front office. Others argued that if any team in the league had the motivation to get creative, to find a way, it was the Lakers, given exactly what they had just witnessed from Wembanyama on that Oklahoma City court. Whether or not that specific blockbuster ever materializes remains one of the most fascinating storylines hanging over this franchise heading into the new season. But the mere fact that it was being seriously discussed tells you everything you need to know about how far the Lakers were willing to go, how much fear that one Western Conference Finals performance had instilled, and how badly this front office wanted to avoid ever being caught defenseless against Wembanyama again. Picture the boardroom conversations that must have taken place. Executives laying out scenarios on whiteboards, running through every possible trade package, weighing the value of young players against future picks, trying to figure out if there was any version of a deal that Milwaukee would actually accept. It's the kind of internal debate that never makes it to television, never gets captured on camera, but shapes the future of a franchise just as much as anything that happens on the court. Somewhere in those meetings, someone almost certainly brought up the same image that had been burned into the minds of Lakers fans everywhere. Wembanyama, rising above defenders, swatting shots into the stands, walking off the floor with a look of calm, quiet dominance while the entire arena sat in stunned silence. That image alone was enough to keep the front office working the phones deep into the summer, long after most other teams had wrapped up their business and turned their attention toward training camp. Let's take a moment to really sit with just how much has changed in such a short amount of time. At the start of that eventful year, the Lakers were a team defined by transition. A stunning trade had brought in a transcendent young superstar guard, instantly reshaping the identity of one of basketball's most storied franchises. Excitement was high. Expectations were skyrocketing. But questions lingered about depth, about size, about whether this new core could actually compete for a title against the league's toughest competition. Then came the Western Conference Finals. Then came 41 points, 24 rebounds, and 3 blocks from a 7'4" phenom who looked less like a basketball player and more like a video game character brought to life. Then came the viral, half-serious trade comment that sent an entire fan base into a fever dream. Then came weeks of quiet, tense negotiations. Then came the stunning 2 first-round picks and 2 swaps package sent to Utah for Walker Kessler. And now, hanging over the entire summer, the lingering question of whether an even bigger blockbuster involving a 2-time MVP might still be coming. It's the kind of transformation that happens in real time, in front of millions of fans, driven almost entirely by the fear, respect, and sheer basketball terror inspired by one single player. And that's really what makes the story so captivating. This wasn't some slow, methodical front office plan executed over years of careful roster building. This was reactive. This was urgent. This was a franchise watching a 22-year-old redefine what dominance looks like in real time, and deciding almost overnight that the cost of standing still was simply too high. Think about the human element buried inside all of this. Somewhere in the Lakers front office, executives were watching game film of Wembanyama, replaying that Western Conference Finals performance over and over, trying to find weaknesses, trying to find answers, and coming up empty every single time. Imagine the pressure of knowing that no matter how good your own superstar is, no matter how electric your offense looks on paper, none of it matters if you cannot survive the other end of the floor against a player who might be redefining the sport in real time. That's the kind of pressure that makes franchises give up 2 unprotected first-round picks. That's the kind of pressure that makes rival executives whisper about pursuing 2-time MVPs. That's the kind of pressure that turns a single postseason performance into a summer-long chain reaction across the entire league. It's easy, watching from the outside, to forget that these decisions are made by real people carrying real stakes. A general manager who gets this wrong doesn't just lose a few games. He risks his job, his reputation, the trust of an entire fan base that has waited years for another championship parade down the streets of Los Angeles. Every draft pick surrendered in the Kessler trade represents a future that now belongs to someone else. A future all-star, a future role player, a future trade chip that Utah will control instead of the Lakers. That is not a decision made lightly, and it is not a decision made out of comfort. It is a decision made out of necessity, out of fear, out of the simple recognition that standing still while Wembanyama kept climbing was no longer an option anyone in that front office was willing to accept. And through it all, Wembanyama himself has remained remarkably composed. Whether his comment about wanting a trade to the Lakers was serious, playful, or something in between, he has continued to do what he does best. Play basketball at a level few humans on this planet have ever reached. Every game he plays adds another layer to his legend. Every performance forces another front office somewhere in the league to reconsider their roster, their timeline, their entire approach to team building. The Lakers just happen to be the franchise willing to blink first, and blink the loudest. So where does this leave the Lakers heading into the new season? They now have their generational young superstar running the show. They now have a legitimate defensive anchor at center in Walker Kessler, acquired at a steep, almost shocking price. They have a front office that has proven, beyond any doubt, that they are willing to be aggressive, willing to sacrifice future assets, willing to move fast when they believe a championship window is on the line. But they still don't have Victor Wembanyama. Nobody does, except San Antonio. And as long as he continues playing the way he played in that unforgettable Western Conference Finals series, every single team in the Western Conference, the Lakers very much included, will have to build their entire roster construction philosophy around one simple, terrifying question. How do you stop him? Right now, the honest answer is that nobody fully knows. Walker Kessler gives the Lakers a fighting chance, a real defensive presence they simply didn't have before. But fighting chances and championships are two very different things. And if the rumors about a superstar forward addition ever turn into reality, the entire complexion of the Western Conference could shift once again. What we do know is this. The chain of events that started with one jaw-dropping performance in Oklahoma City has already reshaped the Lakers roster, drained future draft capital, and ignited speculation about even bigger moves still to come. A single player, still only in his third professional season, has managed to force an entire historic franchise to fundamentally rethink its approach. That is the kind of impact that separates good players from legends in the making. And if this is what Victor Wembanyama is capable of doing to the league before he even turns 23, the rest of the basketball world, Lakers very much included, might want to buckle up. Because if this offseason taught us anything, it's that the fear of facing him is already reshaping the league, one blockbuster trade at a time. And whatever comes next, whether it's a stunning Giannis blockbuster, a surprise free agency swing, or simply watching Walker Kessler grow into his new role under the bright lights of Los Angeles, one thing is certain. The Lakers are no longer building at their own pace. They are building in response to him. Every roster decision, every trade rumor, every front office phone call this summer has carried the same invisible signature behind it. Wembanyama forced their hand. And as training camp approaches, as fans start counting down the days until tip-off, there's an electric, nervous energy hanging over Lakers Nation. They spent big. They gambled big. 2 unprotected first-round picks and 2 swaps is not a decision you make lightly. It's the kind of bet a franchise makes when they truly believe their championship window is open right now, and that missing it because of a lack of size, a lack of rim protection, a lack of an answer for basketball's next great alien, would be a mistake they simply couldn't afford to make. Whether Walker Kessler proves to be enough remains to be seen. Whether the whispers about a superstar forward eventually turn into an official press conference remains to be seen. But one thing about this story will never be forgotten. In the spring of this year, under bright lights in Oklahoma City, a 22-year-old center did something so overwhelming, so undeniable, that it forced one of the most storied franchises in NBA history to tear up their own plan and start scrambling in real time. Victor Wembanyama didn't get traded to the Lakers. Not even close. But in every way that actually matters, he still reshaped their entire roster from 3,000 kilometers away, just by being the most terrifying problem in basketball. And as long as he keeps getting better, as long as he keeps adding new layers to his game every single season, that gravitational pull he has on the rest of the league is only going to grow stronger. So keep an eye on this Lakers roster heading into the new year. Keep an eye on whether that Giannis speculation ever turns into something real. Keep an eye on Walker Kessler, and whether he can grow into the defensive anchor this franchise is desperately betting he can become. Because this story, the story of a franchise chasing an answer to a problem that may not have one, is far from finished. Every preseason game will be watched a little differently now. Every rebound Kessler grabs, every shot he blocks, every possession where he holds his ground against a bigger, stronger opponent, will be measured against the shadow of the player who forced this entire transformation in the first place. Fans will find themselves comparing him, fairly or not, to Wembanyama every single time the two teams share a floor. That is an unfair burden to place on any young player, but it is the burden that comes with being the centerpiece of a trade this expensive, built in response to a threat this real. And when the schedule eventually lines up those two teams against each other, when the Lakers finally have to walk out onto the same court as the player who started all of this, there will be no more rumors, no more speculation, no more viral post-game comments to argue about. Just two rosters, built with completely different philosophies, standing face to face, ready to find out if a summer of panic, gambling, and future mortgaging was enough to finally answer the question that has haunted this franchise since that unforgettable night in Oklahoma City. And somewhere in San Antonio, quietly, patiently, that same 7'4" problem is almost certainly already getting better, getting stronger, and getting ready to make every single team who thought they had an answer look wrong all over again.